Q1 2023 saw a raft of changes to Google Ads. Quite a mixed bag of them, it's fair to say. Some of them surprisingly positive, and all of them worth knowing about, so let's run through them now. Google Optimize will be closed at the end of September. The announcement tells us that Google Optimize and Optimize 360 will no longer be available after September the 30th, 2023. Any experience still active on that date will end. I think maybe that was meant to read experiments, but we won't be pedantic. Google Optimize was the best free option that I've been aware of for testing tweaks to a landing page, though it has always been quite a clunky system and frankly quite easy to forget. Still, whether you've been using it or not, we will now have to look at other platforms for those kinds of landing page tests like Optimizely or Unbounce, and these days most landing page builders do have some kind of A/B testing capability as a standard feature. Not huge news this one, but an interesting flashpoint where Google's nudge towards expanded targeting crossed what many saw as an ethical line. On setting up a new search campaign in the interface, content network targeting is turned on by default. It's one of the many default options that most of us PPCers want to change most of the time. But at some point, I think in February, the option to deselect the content network and the search partners network, although still available, were grayed out. This tweet by Mike Ryan was a good reflection of the more outraged end of the PPC community. I saw this screen and I have to say, for shame, Google Ads, for shame. These buttons are selectable but grayed out. The UI team knows exactly what grayed out buttons mean and what effect this has. This is a dark pattern. Hard-hitting words, but hard to disagree with them. Now for something much more positive. Back in February, you may have seen that Mike Rhodes produced a lovely script for breaking down Performance Max performance by subchannel, shopping, search, display, video, which took a hammer to the wall and smashed open a window onto some of the data that has been notoriously lacking on PMax performance. This would have become even bigger news, except that a week or two later, it was overtaken by the announcement of some serious Performance Max improvements, including, again, some real performance data that we hadn't had before. The news was initially broken by Ginny Marvin of Google around the end of February, and the official page on it came out in early March. The highlights of these updates are 1. Brand exclusions, so much more useful than the account level negatives we'd already been given. These are not negative keywords, they are selected brands to exclude, but the most common reason to want Performance Max negatives is to exclude brand terms, and now we can do that with this option. And if the brand you want to negate is not listed, you can request it to be added. It's not exactly clear how likely that request is to be successful, so we'll have to wait and see how useful this is for smaller brands, but still, all in all, this is a very welcome change. 2. The use of a page feed. Now note, this one is quite easy to misunderstand. It works in 2 different ways depending on your URL expansion setting. So let's have a proper look at this. When final URL expansion is on, this additional feed helps inform and guide Google's AI to understand that these URLs are important, but it doesn't restrict its matching to them. That makes sense. If you have URL expansion on, then by definition you're welcoming some selection from the algorithm side. With final URL expansion off, page feeds make it easier to add more specific URLs to your Performance Max campaign at scale and to restrict matching to just these URLs. So there we do have some new, quite powerful control in terms of guiding the scope of Performance Max campaigns. And the third one I'm picking out as a highlight, and the best one of all, asset group level performance metrics. Now we'll actually be able to see how different asset groups are performing in terms of cost, conversions, conversion value, and so on. So we can compare different asset group setups and use that to test different assets and text and start to do some proper optimization in Performance Max campaigns. Next, some changes to location setting options. Now, the fear with these kinds of changes, especially when they promise to simplify the targeting experience, which is how this one was introduced in this tweet, is that we're losing another notch of control. But thankfully, that's not really the case here. What is changing is that of these location settings currently available, we're losing search interest as a targeting option, which was not really an option I ever recommended or used, and Google is removing it, they say, because of low adoption and lack of clarity. All the behavior of this search interest option is included in the wider presence or interest selection. And the idea of targeting people by their interest in a location, but without also targeting them on the basis of being there, is seen to be unnecessary, and I would tend to agree. So as far as I can see, no real loss in this one. Then under the exclusion options, we're no longer able to exclude people on the basis of showing an interest in a location. And again, I don't see any loss here. When we want to make a location exclusion, their physical presence there is always what we have in mind. So yes, this is the removal of targeting options, but not useful ones. Now a change to display targeting options, and I'm afraid this one was a more classically Orwellian simplification. Up to now, where we'd selected targeting for the content network across keywords, placements, and topics, the default behavior was that the target had to match all of those in order for it to be eligible. It had to match your keywords and your placements and your topics if you'd made selections in all of those categories. The change is that now that behavior is changing from an and to an or. If a target matches anything you've selected in any of those three targeting categories, then it becomes eligible. So this is a typical type of change that Google's making in the direction of expanded targeting and the removal of precision control over your targeting. And this move is particularly unhelpful with display, in my opinion. It's always been hard to see a tangible return on investment with display advertising in Google Ads, and rightly it's seen to have more of a place in the upper funnel. But when it comes to trying to make a direct return on investment, what we've needed in order to do that is more precision in our targeting, not less. But note that custom and combined audiences do still allow this flexibility. When you're creating combined audiences, you can explicitly use that and logic that is now missing from the default targeting setup. So Google is now very vocally promising to create GA4 profiles for us. For any customer who does not set up a GA4 property with basic settings, starting in March, we will configure one with a few basic settings consistent with the existing Universal Analytics property. This might look a bit heavy-handed, but I don't think there's any real harm. There's nothing irreversible in what Google is proposing to do for us here. We'll still be able to remove the automatically configured profile or edit it further if we want to. It might just serve as a useful starting point for those who haven't got around to creating a GA4 profile themselves, which, by the way, we do very much need to do at this point. We've only got a couple of months at time of recording until UA ceases to operate for us. I haven't seen an announcement on this yet, but at the time of recording, a very limited set of accounts has been showing up with a new interface, including a very new looking left-hand nav. One of the big changes in it is that keywords are separated from the campaign setup, which includes ad groups and ads, etc. And it's lumped in with audiences and content. To me, this really seems to demote keywords in terms of their importance as Google wants to portray it. They're not a top-level drop-down, as they are in the current or previous interface, depending when you're watching. Here, keywords are just one among many, like they're thrown in with a sort of other or miscellaneous pile. And they're not even the first in this list. It's audiences, and then keywords, and then content. This is totally in keeping with the long-term move away from keywords as the primary and essential unit of targeting, which we saw reflected in, among other things, the change in name from AdWords to Google Ads. But it's interesting to see it baked into the design like this. Now, as far as I know, this design change, which seems to be on the way, doesn't bring with it any real change in functionality. So as far as I can see, everything that has been technically possible will still be technically possible, but something to get used to, and with a few tonal changes like the way that keywords are presented, and it all looks a little bit more simplified. Probably not one for the purists. Now, one update to mention on Microsoft Ads, and it's that our participation in the audience network is no longer controllable through bid adjustments. So in practical terms, that's quite a big deal. It means that we can no longer tune down or tune out our participation in the audience network. And the audience network has widely been considered to be a bit rubbish. We do have some limited ability to reduce the range of the networks in which our ads show. There is this ad distribution option where we can adjust from showing in the entire Microsoft advertising network or Microsoft sites and select traffic. So this looks a lot like the option to run in search partners in Google or not to. But in this case, we can't now limit our ads to just showing on the SERPs on Bing. Not that Bing is just SERPs anymore, as they integrate their newly acquired AI capabilities. Also, PPC Greg on Twitter has shared this useful doc listing all of the audience network places his campaigns have shown on to date. And I believe he runs a substantial agency, so there are tens of thousands of placements on there, and these can be excluded to keep your ads from showing on the Microsoft Audience Network as far as possible. But perhaps the most significant change to the world of PPC over the last couple of months, and indeed way beyond the world of PPC, has been the rise of ChatGPT. There are plenty of good articles and videos and posts about innovative uses of ChatGPT for PPC, as well as Chrome extensions and Google Sheets extensions cropping up, so I won't list them here, they're quite easy to find. But in short, if you're not already using ChatGPT in your work, then I would strongly urge you to start trying it out. It's not clear yet how all of this is going to change our working lives, but it is clear that it will, and it's going to be far better to be at the front end of that change than in its wake.